Hello everyone and welcome back to the Little Quilter. Today is a super exciting day because we're actually going to start quilting on this quilt, on the Legendary Quilt. So I've got almost everything set up. I've got to change one thing, and so let me get into what we're doing here. So today we're going to be doing pantograph quilting, but we're going to be doing it on the front of the quilt, and we're going to only be quilting in the background. So I wanted to use, so I purchased a pantograph for this Legendary quilt with the thought that I was going to do the entire quilt with the pantograph. I then decided I didn't want to do that. I only wanted to use this pantograph in the background. Now, a couple of things with that. One, my pantograph size is small enough that it can still fit in the background of my quilt, and you're still going to get what the shape is, right? If it was too big and you just stuck it in the background, I feel like it would just look like swirls and loops. And if that's the case, then why not just quilt swirls and loops and leave the pantograph out of it? But in this case, I think you'll be able to get it. So it's going to be feet because this is the Legendary quilt, the Sasquatch quilt. And I want to have those super cool feet in there and still be able to do some free motion quilting on the actual trees, So what I've done to do that, let me show you because it's kind of interesting. So when I researched doing this, the video that I saw, the only video that I found about doing a pantograph only on the background, involved you basically going from behind the machine, moving your quilt machine until you hit the pantograph, and then drawing on your pantograph to say, okay, this is where I was going to stop, and then going back through and quilting all of it and erasing it. And every time you roll the quilt up, doing that. First off, that seemed like a lot of work to me. Second off, it did not seem very accurate. Like, I feel like you just could be off. And depending on what your fabric is, depending on what you're looking at, that might not be a bad thing. Or depending on your accuracy, that might not be a bad thing. But for me, it was just not close enough. So here's what I've decided to do. Okay, so here is what I've done. So behind this rubber band and this is one of these little blue, they are the center bobbin for the MagnaGlide bobbins. And I've basically hot glued, this one kind of fell off, which is why there's more tape there. But I hot glued it onto this right here and onto this blue water erasable pin. And so I am going to basically trace this. So once I am ready to, I can take this lid off, and then I can move the pin down because since it's on rubber band, and it'll basically scooch down. This little block right here will slide down and hit right about here because it doesn't go past this little lip right here. And that will make it close enough so that I can then just draw on the quilt. And so this is my sort of testing here that you can see. Let me see if I can focus it a little bit better there. Okay, so here's my testing that you can see once I was drawing on it. And it's not too bad, actually. I moved some thread here. Not too bad at all. And so my goal is to follow the design that's back here and to trace it on the front and then come back through and basically quilt like this is my pantograph. So following the line on here with the machine. And this way, if I'm over here on the machine, this way, as I quilt, if I run into the tree, I will be able to see it firsthand, follow around it, and restart my line as I'm pantograph quilting. So that's my plan. Now, one thing I have to change to be fully set up is whenever I was lining my pantograph up, so I do have a video of going over how I line that up, but basically I want to come to my top corner and mark my line on the pantograph. Well, as you can see, once I figured out how to get my pin on there, there's at least a good inch difference from that. So I need to change my lines so that this is actually the center or that corner point of my pantograph, so I know that when I'm drawing and moving, I'm going to be on the line. Now, I've never done this before. I didn't see anybody else doing this, and so I don't know if it's going to work. I think it will. It seems like it should, and I think it will be easier, and I'll be able to be a lot more accurate on my quilting if I can see where I don't want to quilt from the front. So the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm only going to do the background first. So I thought about, as I quilted and ran into a tree, I would then just quilt whatever I was going to put in the tree and move on and do the rest of the pantograph and kind of go across the quilt and down so that I could quilt the entire thing. What I've decided to do is, instead of that, I'm going to just do all of the background, roll the quilt back up, and do all of the trees. So, and the Sasquatch. I think this will just be easier, and I won't have to remove my little rigged up pin too much. I can just do the whole thing all in one go. So let's see if this works. I'm going to change my lines, and then I'm going to see if it works. Okay, so some of this looks a little like a toddler drew it, but I'm hoping that once we're kind of quilting it and looking at it in that manner, it's going to work out well. I'm hoping. So obviously, yeah, it's going to be fine. Let me show you closer. Okay, so here is the rough design outline of it. And then, so the nice part about this is once I get to here, right, I am going to stop and I won't quilt into this part, and then I'll be able to come out this way and continue quilting. It's a bit hard to see in the green fabric, so I don't know if this would be something that you could do in a really dark fabric, but with this light fabric, I'm able to see the pieces that I need to quilt. And then, of course, obviously, you know, it looks like a toddler drew it. Now, over here, I had an issue where I feel like the pin must have gotten it moved. And so this was just like horrible looking. So I just sprayed it. I'm waiting for this to dry, and then I'll go back over and do this. But in the meantime, I think I'm going to do these lines. Now, I'm not going to leave these lines on here for too long, and that is because So that is because the blue erase marker is erasable, and they write on there all of that it's erasable, but I have found the longer that blue ink stays on fabric, sometimes it just seems harder to get out of certain fabrics, and I certainly don't want to get to this point in my quilting and have that blue fabric stuck where I can't get it out. So it's one of those things that I would definitely recommend washing out before you're ironing, washing out before you're applying any heat at all to it. And so I just get really nervous about it, and I have never left marks on my quilt for very long. Now, if I'm marking on like the batting part, that's going to get cut off, I've definitely left those on. And I did that a lot for the Kite in a Square block quilt where I was coming out along the border. I would just mark my line where I wanted to continue that diamond. I would mark it onto the batting, and that way I didn't worry about it staying in the quilt, and I could just mark it and then quilt as much as I could without having to start and stop. So let's see how this looks once I actually start quilting it. Okay, I'm gonna have to say that other than my mess up, which I'm waiting for this to dry, because I need it to dry before I can draw over it, and then I'll do this top line here, and I think we're getting pretty close, but I'm pretty excited by this. I think this is looking really cool, and even though it looked super like a 5-year-old, maybe a 5-year-old, like a 5-year-old drew those, once you were kind of in the flow, once I was in the flow of quilting it, you kind of, I mean, you know what the pantograph should look like in your eye, you know, like in your mind's eye. And so being able to flow and move it so that it fits and that it's nice and you can see it from the front, so you know that, like, okay, that shape is going to look good. This is what the curve of a foot should look like. It really went really, really well. I'm excited to remove the blue from it so that then we can just see the design and the texture that it brings to this quilt. Now, I will say this. Stopping and starting on the trees is not ideal. Definitely not going to be a saver of thread on this one. Now, I'm not overly concerned by that. You know, where I can, I'm going to try and go above, but especially once I get down into like the body of the tree, I mean, that's just not going to be possible. I'm not going to outline the tree every time I come through a pass. So I will have to start and stop, but I'm starting and stopping on the edge, and then when I do the actual tree, I will be outlining the whole tree, so I'll go over that area again, which is going to do a little bit of thread buildup, but the other side of it for me is that it does provide a bit of security, I feel like, to those. You know, I do set my stitches before I cut my thread, all of that kind of stuff, but I still always just feel more confident in quilting staying whenever I can just do one long continuous quilting and run the entire bobbin out without having to start and stop. But that's not going to be the case for this quilt, and that's okay. It will be fine, and, you know, I'm setting my stitches, it'll be fine.